Hey, Greg or whoever is administrating the Zoom, do you want to just test real quick and the screen share with me as I'm going to be presenting primarily, or just in case something doesn't work? Because Greg, I think you have the presentation on your computer, or should we just cross that bridge when we come to it?
Greg's needed.
Eli, you want to do a quick test?
Sure. Let's see. Which of these many screens? This one right here. How's that? Visible?
Yeah, that's not my screen though.
No, it's not. You have to share your screen.
Okay.
Have any luck, Jeff? Jeff, are you able to share your screen, or you just lost your audio?
No.
Eli, can you unlock me to share?
Oh. You should be able to.
Host disabled public screening sharing. Says I'm disabled.
Co-host. How about this? And how about if I do the same for Jeff? How about now?
Yeah, I can.
Jeff, you should be able to now. I just made you a co-host.
Yeah, I'll share mine. Okay, is that up for everybody to see?
Yep.
Jeff, is your audio working?
Jeff, can you hear us? Sound like it. Jeff, can you hear us?
What happened to his audio?
Nope, I can't hear you. So,
Hey, can people hear me now?
there we go.
Yeah, that was weird. I mean, I heard everybody and then I didn't and I logged off. So Greg, are you controlling this? This is on your screen?
Yes, unless you want to try to get it on yours.
I mean, if you don't mind being the flipper, I mean, we can try to, if you want to try to screen share with me, I have the same thing ready to go.
I've got it. Let's just go with what we've got here. You can just
All
tell me
right.
when to advance.
Okay.
All right, so if we're set, I'm gonna get things rolling here. 7:07 p.m. Thursday, October 29th, and I will call the Board of Selectmen meeting to order. This is a presentation, meeting with one agenda item. It is a presentation by SLV Venture, Strategic Land Ventures regarding a 40B development project in the Shingle Hill area on School Street near Cedar Swamp. I want to welcome a fairly large contingent of the public who's here to hear this presentation. So I'm going to go through a few details about the meeting, and a list of people is here. Let people introduce themselves, and then I'm going to give a brief introduction and then turn the presentation over to Mr. Engler. So we have here tonight, by the way, we're doing this meeting in a webinar format on Zoom, which means it's a little bit different from our normal Board of Selectmen meetings. In the webinar format, you can't see the other members of the public who are here. You can see the panelists, but members of the public typically have their video disabled. It will allow us to manage the meeting a little bit better, to have a good mechanism for handling questions and answers at the end. And it will also give us a little bit more flexibility to handle the potential of Zoom bombers. So we can kick them to the curb a little bit easier if that does in fact happen. Okay, so tonight we have the regular cast of the Board of Selectmen. We also have the Town Administrator Greg Federspiel, Town Planner Sue Brown, and one of the Town Councils, John Whitten, who has familiarity with deep familiarity with 40Bs and can answer questions related to the process for 40Bs as needed. And we also have a collection of people from Strategic Land Ventures. And Jeff, if you would be willing to go through your collection of people and introduce them, I'd appreciate it. Buddy's muted. Jeff, you're muted there. Jeff, can you hear us? It was working so well.
No, he's saying he's dialed in by phone.
Yeah, I see it.
Can people hear me?
Yep. Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay.
All right, so if you wouldn't mind, could you introduce your team to the audience?
I would, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. I've never had some of these technical difficulties before, so please bear with me. And if for some reason I get dropped, if somebody can, raise their hand or whatever, I also have you on the phone.
Okay.
So tonight we're joined by Dan Riggs from Embark Studios, our project architect. Carlton Quinn from Allen and Major is our civil engineer. Matt Merva from Bowler will be presenting our landscape architecture, and Sean Kelly from Vanass and Associates will be discussing our traffic. Additional team members with us tonight, are Ken Millender from Miller Engineering, our geotechnical engineer, David Formato from Onsite Engineering, who's handling wastewater, Dan Wells from Goddard Consulting, our environmental and wetlands consultant, and Mark Fugeri from Fugeri Development and Planning, our fiscal impact consultant. So with that said, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you want me to kick off the presentation or if you have anything else prior to us commencing.
I have some introductory comments I'm gonna make, and then I'm gonna let you get moving on the presentation.
Okay.
All right, so so first I'm gonna start out with what brought us here, a little bit of the timeline. So last year, Strategic Land Ventures secured an option on a private parcel comprising the property around Shingle Hill. And following this, they approached the town administrator and the town planner regarding some initial intentions to do a development on the parcel as a 40B development. And under state law, a developer can pursue a project in a municipality and bypass the local zoning ordinance if the municipality doesn't meet certain minimal state requirements, and that's the case of this. And developers constrained then by local health ordinances and state DEP requirements, but the entire process is very different from a regular development. So in July, the developer met with myself and some town staff to express their desire to pursue the 40B development as a friendly 40B, and to discuss a rough time frame for when they might come before the board to present their proposal. Immediately following this, town started the process of communicating to other boards and the residents regarding the possibility of the development. In the regular Board of Selectmen meetings, the town administrator began outlining the process for 40B developments, and the various town boards started getting ramped up on the process. Then in August, the town arranged a multi-board meeting with the planning board, the Zoning Board of Appeals, the Concom, and FinCom to discuss various land use issues. And at this meeting, we had a presentation by town council on the 40B process. And in the end of September, SLV presented the town with their site approval application, officially beginning the process that we're now engaged in. So the materials of the application were sent to various boards and posted on the town website, and a meeting was scheduled for tonight for SLV to present their proposal to the Board of Selectmen. And in the intervening time, some of the town boards and staff have been working through the proposal, developing initial impressions and questions that they will refine over the coming weeks. Independent of the town, developers also had a number of meetings with representatives from the Manchester Essex Conservation Trust as some land abutting the area that they're proposing to develop. So the process going forward from tonight. So tonight's meeting is going to be the first public presentation of the proposal by SLV. After this, there will be a number of public meetings over the coming weeks between the Board of Selectmen and the developer and see if an agreement can be reached under which the town will support development as a friendly 40B. Public input and comment will be accepted along the way and at these upcoming meetings and will be considered by the board as we negotiate. So if we arrive at an agreement, then the developer will submit an application to the state for a determination of project eligibility, and then we'll present a comprehensive permit application to the Zoning Board of Appeals, which includes the agreement between the town and the developer. And the terms of the agreement would then be binding on the zoning board and the developer at that point. If we don't arrive at an agreement, the developer will still seek project eligibility from the state, and then they'll present a comprehensive permit application to the zoning board, and the town can argue for mitigation measures, but those will then be approved or disapproved ultimately by the state. So that's the unfriendly version. That's what we're currently not planning to do. The Zoning Board of Appeals in either scenario will be the board that handles the comprehensive permit application and the bulk of the remaining meetings between the developer and the town after we go through this initial process. And that will be a considerable period of time. So tonight's meeting. So what is tonight's meeting? So tonight's meeting is this public presentation of the developer's plans for the development in pretty good detail. And it's an opportunity for the Board of Selectmen to ask clarifying questions about the development and the process. And it's an opportunity for the public to hear from the developers themselves what the project will be like and to ask clarifying questions about the presentation. Now, what the meeting is not about tonight. So tonight is not a time that we're going to be debating the merits of the project or discussing strategies relative to the project. So I know a lot of members of the public have concerns. Some support the project so far from what they've heard of it. Some do not. But I've seen a lot of traffic, Facebook and email, that shows that there's not a clear understanding of the process and or the project so far. And from my point of view, it's much better for people to take the time to listen to the presentation tonight, take the time to formulate questions and concerns you may have after you've heard the full presentation. And then we'll strongly encourage you to submit any real concerns or about the project or the merits of the project in writing. And we'll be compiling those questions and concerns, and we'll take the time to address them with town staff if possible and with the developer as needed. So if you have follow-up questions, then we'll entertain those at the subsequent public meetings or in writing. And this should allow us to get people the best answers possible and in the most efficient way possible. We're going to do our best to educate the residents about the development and the process, what we can and can't do, and over time to answer everybody's questions. And we're going to take the time to listen to their concerns, to all your concerns, and to hash it all out with the developer and hopefully come to an agreement which suits the interests of the town and the developer, so that we get the best result possible here. So that's the process. Again, we'll go through the presentation with the developer, and then we will enter a question and answer phase. And as I said, we're going to please restrict the answers, the questions to about details of the presentation, and not don't get on a soapbox to say that you do or do not like the project. There'll be opportunity for that later. And first, let's educate ourselves on the process and on the proposal. Okay, so that's my introduction. And Jeff, if you'd like to take it away on the presentation, we'd appreciate it. And we'll take whatever time we need to go through the presentation and answer questions about the presentation.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate it. Excellent job teeing everything up. Just to members of my team, the town administrator, Greg, is in control of the presentation. So when it comes time to present your respective slides, just cue him relative to when you should advance, and we'll do the best we can. As the chairman said, I'd like to thank the members of the board, members of the public, town department for allowing us to present tonight. My name is Jeff Engler. I'm a principal in SLV School Street, who's the applicant in this case to the Department of Housing and Community Development, this application. A little bit about me. I've been in the multifamily housing development and consulting business and real estate business for about 22 years. I've been involved in many multifamily housing projects, more than I would care to admit to, permitted thousands of units under Chapter 40B, including projects in Winchester, Hingham, Wellesley, Weston, Brookline, Newton, to name just a few. We're particularly enthusiastic about this development as we believe it has a lot of the characteristics municipalities look for in multifamily housing. Among others, it has great vehicular access, and we believe it's not directly impactful to any residential butters. In fact, if you go to slide 2, we really don't have a single residential abutter to our project, which is highly unusual for a multifamily housing project. And we also think there's no other real development like this in the entire town. In fact, we know that will provide a maintenance-free lifestyle, the level and scale of finish that we're going to be proposing here. As many of you know, the town has gone to great lengths through its planned production plan and its master plan to identify its housing needs. And we believe our proposal checks a lot of those boxes. And then equally importantly, the town, through its support of this project, can achieve its 10% safe harbor status and be in control of all future 40B projects. So for that, what that means to members of the public joining us is the town really will not need to entertain any 40B projects after this unless it desired as much, unless it reached it was either friendly 40B or the town really was fully supportive. But it certainly will not have to entertain any neutral or unfriendly 40Bs. So we've prepared a presentation tonight that we think hits upon many of the highlights of the application. We'll try to go through it quickly. We're happy to answer questions as they occur. As we are in the beginning of the process, I can say with a high degree of certainty, we're probably not going to have every answer tonight, but we will certainly endeavor to provide those answers in the near future because we recognize they're important to the overall process. And I think as the chairman stated, it's important to reiterate that tonight is really, the first in a long process of public engagement and discussion. I think some people may think that we're before the Board of Selectmen tonight and next meeting, and then we're out on the site constructing this. It's not, anything like that. It's a long process. And as the chairman said, we're simply looking for a preliminary endorsement of the concept from the Board of Selectmen, which really just allows us to get up to bat with the state, and then ultimately the Zoning Board of Appeals, which is where we'll discuss, all the technical elements of the project, the stormwater management, the grading and drainage, all the technical elements. So it's important to recognize that we're really just getting started, and there's a lot of public hearings and opportunity for input and public discourse as we move forward. And I can't say that strongly enough. With that said, I think what we'd like to do is start by talking about the architecture. And Dan Riggs from Embark Studios is going to walk everybody through our preliminary architectural vision for the product. Or for the project, I should say, and we'll go from there. So if Greg, if you could just fast forward. And I should say before we get started, I think most of you know, and forgive me, but this project is for 157 apartment units, 25%, which will be deed restricted to households earning up to 80% of area median income. So what that means is 25% of the units will not be available as open occupancy. They'll be restricted to households that qualify through the affirmative marketing and lottery process. But under state regulations, because it is a rental project, the town gets to count 100% of the units, all 157, on its subsidized housing inventory, not just the 25% affordable. So with that said, Greg, if you could fast forward, I think these are just some images of the site. nothing particularly exciting. We'll get back to that. And then we'll turn it over to Dan, who will walk everybody through the architecture. Dan? Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. We just can't hear Dan.
Dan? Dan Riggs? If he's not there, I can do it. Going once? Going twice? Okay, I'm not sure exactly what happened, but let's proceed. Next slide, Greg. So this is an aerial. All of you, I imagine, are familiar with the location of the site. We're off of School Street, proximate to the interchange on 128. Really, our closest abutter is the athletic club across the street. This slide's a little bit dark, but it shows the outline of the property in question, but the predominance of the development is occurring on the northerly portion of the site. Next slide. This is just a little bit more of a close-up of the site. It's had some uses historically, and excuse me, I'm reading a chat here from Dan who's saying his audio is lost, but we'll keep going. So next slide, Greg. So as part of any project that we're involved with, we're looking closely at what are some of the architectural styles that are evident within the municipality. And not trying to ingratiate myself, but I think anybody that's been to Manchester by the Sea would acknowledge, you know, what a beautiful community it is. It has so many different historic houses, buildings, architectural elements. And not to say we're trying to reproduce those, because we're not in its exact form, but we're definitely looking for clues or cues, excuse me, as we're contemplating different architectural components for our building. Next slide. So this is a few of the images. We'll get to this later, but this is an existing conditions plan of the property. For those not that familiar, looking at existing conditions plan, when you have lines very close to each other, it means there's a lot of grade or steepness. So as you can tell, this site has a plateau at the top, but has definitely its fair share of steepness almost on all portions of the site. So that makes some of the site work associated with the development more challenging, but definitely not unable to overcome. So next slide.
Jeff, can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now, Dan. You want to take it from here?
Yeah, big apologies on that. I'm not sure what happened with the audio connection there. It took me several tries, so apologies for that. Just picking up where Jeff left off. So these are some images of context around the site. So image A, looking towards our site from north of the site itself along School Street. Image B is looking just over the bridge on 128 north towards the site. As you can see, a lot of tree cover here and elevation. Image C rather is along 128 looking northeast again. And image D is looking north towards the site from 128 again. If you can go to the next slide, please.
Next slide, Greg.
So this is a diagram of our building on that site. So the site itself is a little over 23 acres, and our building is occupied on the northernmost part of that site. Here you can see School Street coming down that direction. This is the old School Street walking trail that continues past our site southwest, as well as the connection to the conservation area boardwalk. And this area here is the parking for the Old School Street Trail and those conservation areas. You enter our site off of School Street here, where we create this kind of double lane entry to our site. And you'll see later on in our presentation the care that we put into addressing that area of the site and that entry to the site. The entry itself winds its way along around the building as it goes up in elevation. The main entry to the building is located right here along that drive, as well as 16 parking spaces here for visitors. There's also handicap spaces, and we've put care to make sure we've allocated at least spaces for 2 vans or bus-sized vehicles there for loading, deliveries, shuttles, etc. And we've also included in this a turnaround for those buses and delivery vehicles, as well as for fire access. And in that area, there's a bus shelter and other provisions for that use. The building itself is organized into these 2 major wings that go sort of north-south along this axis that hold the majority of the units, and they're linked together by this bar in the middle. And as you can see here, the main amenities at the ground floor are located right where that sort of drop off and main entry are for the site. Go to the next slide, Greg. So these are the floor plans for the building itself. Here you can see the basement level plan where we house the majority of the parking. So it's not out on surface, it's mostly hidden within the base of the building that is itself sort of buried into the landscape. And this houses 231 parking spaces. And you can see how here that interacts with that turnaround that we just looked at. This floor plan shows the first floor of the building here, with that main kind of entry aligning with the majority of our lobby and amenity space is located right there as well. And that allows this connection to both the north amenity courtyard and the south amenity courtyard. So those spaces all kind of flow together and create this great suite of both indoor and outdoor amenities. This next plan is the second floor plan. So it's a typical 40-unit floor plan with a mix of different unit sizes and unit types. Many of those have outdoor space to take advantage of the lush foliage that surrounds our site. And we've allocated most of the corners with a double exposure to be our 3-bedroom units and kind of larger units. If you can go back to the next slide, Greg. So the third floor plan, fourth floor plan, very similar to the lower floor plan. And then we have this small amenity space on the 5th floor that we've located towards the center of the floor plan to reduce its visibility, but also take advantage of some of the views that we'll have from that location. Go to the next slide, Greg. So these are some of the metrics of our project. So site areas just over 1 million square feet. So that's a little over 23 acres. First floor is 49,000 gross square feet. So that's about the typical floor plate size. The total building gross square footage for the residential levels, that's 1 through 5, 198,000 square feet. The parking garage gross square footage, 87,000 square feet for a grand total of 286,700 gross square feet. It's an FAR of 0.19. And so site coverage of 19%. The building height is 62 feet, 4 inches. And it's 5 stories that are above the grade plane. That's, again, the parking is tucked underneath the building, takes advantage of some of the grade change that we have on site. We have a total of 247 parking spaces. Again, 231 of those are located underneath the building. It's 16 surface spaces. So for a parking ratio of 1.5 spaces per unit. The building has 157 units in it, and it makes up a variety of different unit sizes and types. So 32 of those are 1-bedroom units. 48 of those are 1-bedroom plus units, so that is a unit that typically has an outdoor space and a little more generous kind of common area spaces within the unit itself. 23 are 2-bedroom units. 38 are 2-bedroom plus units. So again, those are units that have a little more generous common spaces. 16 are 3-bedroom units for 10%. Typical residential floor is 41 units on it, and our indoor amenity space is a total of 10,700 gross square feet. And then we also have, as you saw on that last slide, there's the south amenity deck and the north amenity deck combined for 31,790 gross square feet of amenity space that's housed on site in the building. If you go to the next slide, Greg. So as we started to approach, how we articulate the building itself, we took some precedent from what we see as a lot of traditional kind of seaside architecture of that's both found in Manchester by the Sea as well as all along the North Shore. So we studied some of those precedents and took away a few lessons from those and tried to adapt those to our multifamily context. So a few of those points are having a neutral, natural color palette, using clapboard building materials, including trim and trim kind of detailing. Strong horizontal datum lines, as you can see in this example here, as well as balconies and windows that are incorporated within those horizontal datum lines. Go to the next slide, Greg. And we found similar examples of those strategies within buildings in the Manchester by the Sea context as well. If you can go to the next slide, Greg. So we started to kind of break that down in a series of moments throughout the building, realizing because of the foliage and the context that you really only see, you never really see the building in its entirety. You're mostly glimpsing at it in a series of kind of moments. So we started to approach the building design with the same principles that we had seen in those buildings around the context. So incorporating shingle style detailing, potentially some flared clapboard skirt detailing, windows that are banded horizontally, sort of within a clapboard and trim framework, using kind of neutral and natural materials like a kind of a wood tone material, as well as these grays and whites. And then planting areas that can kind of interact with the bays and courtyards to create a sense of depth, and as well as some of these cornice elements like you see here. Next slide, please, Greg. So these are the building elevations. And again, these are a little bit, not disingenuous, but they're a little bit difficult because you never really glimpse the building in its entirety when you're looking at it like you are in these images. So this is the east elevation, which shows the building entry here. This is building beyond. So that's the east elevation. The north elevation is this image number 2. So this is really the faces that you see as you enter the site. And again, this is really that part of the building here and this part of the building here, and the rest of that is beyond in that image. So again, using a lot of these natural wood tones, lighter white colors, gray, and a lot of trim to try to harken back to the aesthetic of the North Shore and Manchester by the Sea. You go to the next slide, please. The west elevation, so that's this elevation here is number 3. A lot of the same motifs, and you can see again here how many different balconies we're using to take advantage of our lush natural context. And that last image is the south elevation. If you can go to the next slide, please, Greg. So these are some building sections. So again, you can see the articulation of the building in the courtyard, as well as the parking garage here, which is really kind of tucked into the natural grade of the site. I can go to the next slide, please. So we've also prepared a series of images of how the building looks in a little bit more realistic way than the elevations show. So this is a view from the School Street parking area that we showed on that previous site diagram. So you can see this is School Street along here. The entrance to the site would just be beyond that, and this is the building in the distance. You can go to the next slide, please. This is a view along the Old School Street walking trail. So this is really pretty close to the beginning of that trail. And as you can see, as you continue down this path, the building itself, which is back here in the distance, becomes almost entirely obscured or entirely obscured by foliage as you go down that pathway. So, in this context, you can go to the next slide, please, Greg. This is an image of our building from the School Street entryway. So you can see here some of the terracing and landscaping that we put quite a bit of care into at the base of the building and at the site entry. And Matt and Carlton will go into that in more detail later on. If you go to the next slide, Greg. This is the building entry. So again, we have a very generous drop-off area here, loading, drop-off, trying to take into account all the different uses that we have on this site, as well as creating a clear entryway here with this two-story glazed area that would be amenity space at the ground floor and a small amenity area at the second floor to help activate that area. If you can go to the next slide, please. And this is another image illustrating some of the ambiance within the courtyard itself. So the amenity areas are very sort of privatized and enclosed within the building itself. And we make those very lively, use a lot of wood tones again. And it's really a lush, kind of fully amenitized courtyard area in those spaces. That's the end of the architectural slide. Thank you.
Matt, you want to walk through the landscape plan and the outdoor amenity areas? Well, we seem to be, each team member, he was on before, and so I'm not sure what's going on, but I will, yeah, he's sending me a text right now. All right, I'll get started while he figures out how to log back in. But the outdoor amenities are somewhat unique on this project, not too dissimilar from the 147 unit project we just approved this year in Winchester. But if you see the two areas between the top and bottom of the building that show the patios, the area to the east where the pool is, the area to the back where we have the arbor and the fire pits, and whether that ends up being a bocce court or whatnot, those are actually on top of the parking garage. So it's a good way, because what we've done is by putting almost all of the parking under the building, other than the 16 visitor spaces outside, you're really not going to see any of the parking. And we've taken advantage of that flat area by amenitizing it for the benefit of all the residents. So that's really, at residential, the first residential level, but it sits on top of the parking. So as you can see, we have a double-barreled entrance for about the first half of the drive up from School Street, and you meander around the building. We have the turnaround area. We have introduced what we think is a pretty generous landscaping program. But one of the things that we've been very conscious of attempting to do, and I have a slide at the end of the deck, is to maintain a lot of the existing vegetation. So if you can see the area between our entrance and the turnaround, we're maintaining a lot of that existing vegetation, and there's a significant grade difference. So that's going to serve as some screening. And then the area both between our driveway and the what I'll call the top of our building to the north will remain. And then most importantly, all the vegetation that you see between Old School Street and our driveway will remain. And as a future slide will show, that's not 10 feet, 20 feet, 50 feet. those are like 150, 200, 250 feet of existing vegetation that will remain as part of the future condition. That is on the left. We have, as you to the far left of the plan, we have a little a shed that'll be where the infrastructure for the wastewater treatment facility is stored. It's almost like a garage shed. It's pretty de minimis. And then we have some additional areas throughout the program, not on top of the deck, where people can congregate, walk their dogs, relax outside. And then obviously we have the benefit of the entirety of the site, which will largely remain untouched if people want to, go for walks in the woods. Greg, if you go to the next slide, keep going. So one of the things that we've done, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the schematic landscaping plan as we move through this. Greg, next slide. But what we've introduced is an entire schedule of plantings, proposed species, volumes, technical specs. It's pretty elaborate. That's not to say we're completely married to everything in the proposed plan. Commonly, we hear input throughout the process of species that are more unique to a particular area or municipality. We're certainly open to suggestions, but we wanted to put our best foot forward with a preliminary plan. Greg, you can go to the next slide. So this is what we've called, it's really a palette of proposed plantings, a representative sample of species to represent some of the different types of trees, bushes, flowers, and whatnot we're planning to include in the overall planting plan. Next slide, Greg. Continuation. So as you can see, a lot of different types of varieties and species.
Can you hear me, Jeff?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
I'm so sorry. I don't know what's going on here. You're doing great, though. You should be a landscape architect, Jeff.
Not quite, but take it away.
My apologies. My name's Matt Merva with Bowler. I've had the pleasure of working with Jeff on several projects, and hopefully, again, after this one, after not really showing up for the Zoom here, but I think he hit on a lot of the points I was going to make. The slides are handy. Again, these are representative images of plant materials that we will be proposing around the site, and we'll get into details on quantity and spacing as we get further into detail, but just wanted to give people a sense of kind of the character of that landscape. If you could click to the next slide, please. So these are some of the flowering deciduous shrubs and lower growing plant materials that'll provide color and year-round interest around the site. If you click to the next. Some of the rooftop species, these are meant to be low maintenance and create some greenery on the roof, which would otherwise be a pretty sparse structure, trying to create some areas for congregation outside and to create year-round interest there, but also plants that require little maintenance and low watering requirements will definitely be part of the palette here. If you can click to the next. So these are some images of those materials: grasses, turf. We'll have some sedum and lower growing vegetation, of course, in rooftop tray systems, and we'll be getting into more detailed design as the project proceeds. If you could click again. Jeff, did you pull up the cross section already?
No, that's the final slide of the deck. So we
okay, so we'll come back to that then. That's great. So that's probably good for now, and we'll talk more later. Thank you. Okay.
All right, Carlton, are you audible?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Looks like my camera's not going to work, but as long as you can hear me.
We can hear you.
This is our cover page. My name's Carlton Quinn. I work with Allen and Major Associates in Woburn, Mass. And I've been working with Jeff for many years in multifamily housing. If you want to get started, we can go to the next slide. This is about half the site. This is the northerly side of the site. As you can see, it's got a lot of topography. It's about 23.5 acres. And shown here is about half the site. And our development is going to be kept to this half of the site, and the southerly half will have a leaching field for the wastewater system, but that's the only development proposed on that, and that can remain vegetated above it. There is some historic use of the site as a quarry on the northern site. The geotech went out there and found some significant evidence that the site was mined at some point in the past. Just to note that there's a gravel path through there and some low points that created an isolated wetland that we'll be putting our driveway through. And I just want to note that the isolated wetland isn't state regulated like the other wetlands on the site are that we're filling, as we'll go forward and see, but we are going to replicate that at a 2-to-1 ratio as a BVW, which should serve a better function environmentally than the one it is now, with a basically gravel path driving right through it. Next slide. Here's the southerly side. There's some bordering vegetated wetland on the southerly side and the northerly side here. It's kind of landlocked. It's got much more difficult topography than the northerly side. And again, we'll be putting in a leaching field in this area, but other than that, it should remain as is. Next slide, please. This is our layout plan. This is, you can see, as we spoke earlier about the kind of the corkscrew type road. One of the first people we met with in the town was Chief Cleary. We wanted to get his input on this site, as it clearly provides us some challenges. So we showed him we have a boulevard style road. We've made that extra wide to make sure that we have plenty of room for vehicular emergency traffic. We've put these brakes every 200 feet just to make sure if there's any sort of crash that they can cut through and use the other side and come back as they need. We provided a generous fire truck turnaround. He provided us a turnaround that he used on a subdivision, and we used that to model this, and we've modeled it with fire truck software, and there's adequate room for the fire truck to get in and out of this site. As you're aware, this site is in the Limited Commercial District and the Water Resource Overlay Protection District, Zone 3. I just want to note that in the zoning, it requires any project in the Watershed Overlay District Zone 3 to have no more than 15% impervious, or it must recharge stormwater. We have less than 15% impervious on the site, and we will be recharging water, a significant amount of water on the site. So that was a thought process. We went into this just to make sure we were kind of doing the intention of the Water Resource Overlay Protection District, even though it is a local bylaw. Dimensionally, we meet almost all the requirements. We have the parking and the fire truck access as we went through. I think here you can see the leaching field on the northerly side. It's kind of on the bottom left behind the wastewater treatment plant. And if you flip to the next slide, we can show the leaching field on the next slide. It's that rectangle there. That's just a conceptual area of where it's going to be. We've done some initial field testing just to make sure it's in the adequate location. Got plenty of setback to the wetlands as required by the DEP. Next slide, please. Here's our grading plan. Grading and drainage were probably my two biggest jobs going into this conceptually. We kind of provided that boulevard style road coming up. Made sure it was wide enough for a fire truck. And obviously the slopes are a concern. The slopes coming up here about 8%. The state fire code requires under 10%. So we made sure to meet those grades coming up here. There was a lot of options to grade this site, but most of them stripped a lot of the vegetation away by trying to make the grades work. So at a significant expense, we wanted to save those trees, and we added a lot of retaining walls on the site in order to keep as much of that vegetation as we could, because we thought it was a great resource for the project, and it's not something that we can just regrow. Stormwater wise, for 157 units to only have a 157 car or have was it 16 cars in the parking lot creates a great benefit to stormwater quality. If you were going to park this on surface parking lot, you'd have over 2 acres of parking lot. This is all under the building. That's going to remove salt and sanding and hydrocarbons that you typically get in a parking lot that would go into your stormwater system that won't be going in there. You know, you'll be getting clean roof water. Some of the amenity spaces will be landscaped on the decks. So this will be a much higher quality of stormwater initially, even before it's treated, than you will see on most big developments like this. We will be meeting the 10 stormwater quality standards of the Mass DEP. My guess is that we'll probably exceed all of those, as is the case in most projects I work with Jeff. We're trying to do the right thing. And I think that's all I have. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Greg, you can, I think there was one other plan, Carlton. We just developed a snow storage plan showing where, you know, during a snow event, we would push the snow, obviously, all the property around the impervious areas, ours as well. But, you know, we typically towns ask to see that, so we included that. Sean, shout, hopefully we can hear you.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep, all right, great. Greg, can you fast forward to, yeah, there you go.
Great. Well, good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Again, for the record, Sean Kelly with Vanass and Associates, with the transportation engineers in this project. We've also worked with Jeff for a number of years on a number of projects similar to this. What I'd like to do tonight is just take a few minutes to walk you through our traffic study, you know, how it was conducted, what our findings were, what our recommendations are, and then again, I'd be happy to answer any questions that members of the board or audience might have. Advance. So just a brief summary of what we did. You know, we conducted a study in accordance with all, you know, state and industry guidelines, particularly with as it relates to Mass DOT. We looked at existing conditions relative to traffic volumes, pedestrian and bicycle accommodations, public transportation. We collected traffic volumes, you know, MassDOT's guidelines for, you know, COVID adjustments, adjusted those volumes. Also comparing to pre-COVID volumes along the corridor to ensure what we looked at was representative of typical conditions. The findings of the study are that the project is generally not expected to have a notable increase to area traffic. The delays and associated queuing are not projected to have a notable increase relative to how they would be in the future without the project. There were no safety deficiencies. We looked at crash rates in the area, and all those crash rates, you know, fell below the state average for this Mass DOT district. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, with respect to the access onto School Street, we looked at vehicle speeds, we looked at sight lines, and the available sight lines in both directions well exceed the requirements that are necessary to ensure safe access to and from the site. Advance. So I think we're all probably familiar with the study, the site location, but again, it's on the west side of School Street, just north of the interchange with Route 128. From a transportation perspective, you know, you really couldn't ask for a better site in terms of regional access. From the driveway to the interchange is about a quarter mile on the dot. So it's you know, the impact in terms of traffic with commuting patterns isn't focused in the downtown area or residential streets. It's really a quick shot to and from the highway system. In the area, you also have Mill Street that comes in opposite the ramps, then Atwater Avenue, which is leads into the athletic complex and some medical office space. Advance. So this is the study area that we looked at. We looked at the intersections that we felt would accommodate the majority of project-related traffic. Again, Atwater, that should say Atwater Avenue, is the northernmost intersection. We looked at both of the interchange, the northbound and southbound ramps from Route 128, and then also Mill Street that comes in just north of that ramp interchange. We looked at traffic conditions in the morning and evening peak hours. The reason that we focus on these time periods is this is when the traffic associated with the project is at its heaviest and when the commuter flows along the corridor are at their heaviest. Today, the School Street corridor carries about 7,300 cars on a typical day, about 400 during the morning peak hour, then about 600 during the evening peak hour. Again, we also looked at the safety characteristics of all of these intersections. We looked at the number of crashes and how that relates to the state averages, and all of the intersections in this area were below the state average with no safety deficiencies noted. Next slide, please. With respect to the traffic that the project will generate, we rely on what's known as the Institute of Transportation Engineers, or the ITE. And the ITE gives you rates that identify how much traffic you can expect, both on a daily basis and then also on a peak hour basis based on the number of units. And what it tells us is that for a project of this size, you're going to see about 850 trips on a day, on a 24-hour weekday. That's about 425 in, 425 out. And this includes everything, people going to work in the morning, people coming home from work in the evening, any trips associated with, school traffic, trash pickup, deliveries, you name it, it's all baked into the numbers. So that's the daily number. In terms of peak hour traffic, typically a project of this size will do about 53 trips in the morning peak hour and close to 70 in the evening peak hour. I often get the question, so I'll explain it. This isn't the only traffic that you'll see during those commuter peaks, but it's during the busiest hours. So, some people are going to commute, if they're going to Boston, they're going to leave at 6 in the morning. Some may not leave till 7. Some may not leave until 8. If you work in, retail or sales or in the service industry, you may not leave your house till even later in the day. If you're someone that works in town or lives in town today and wants to, downsize and get out of the large home you no longer need because you're retiring, you may not leave at all during the commuter peaks because you don't have a job. So but the ITD data shows that during that busiest hour, it's about 50 to 70 trips. And what we do to be conservative is we assume that those trips will be coincident with the busiest hour on the roadway. So we basically overlay that and look at that condition as though they'll happen at the same time to present a conservative analysis scenario. Next slide. In terms of the distribution of where the traffic's going, we look at U.S. Census data to look at traffic patterns, commuter patterns. I'm sure it's no surprise that the bulk of the traffic, 60%, almost 2/3, will be getting on 128 southbound in the morning and then returning back 128 northbound in the evening. Smaller percentages on some of the local roads, including 30% towards the downtown area. Next slide. So our recommendations really first is related to site access. I know that we walked through this, but we're recommending, the boulevard entrance separated by a raised median as you approach School Street, with minimum 14-foot wide lanes, with the island separating inbound and outbound traffic, with breaks in that island to allow for vehicles to get through if there was any safety issue in terms of a crash. Certainly, everything adhering to industry guidelines relative to having a stop sign, pavement markings and signage, adhering to the manual uniform traffic control devices. In terms of pedestrian accommodations, we're proposing sidewalk within the project limits with ADA compliant crossings. Any signs and landscaping located in such a way to ensure we don't create any safety issues with lines of sight. And then, anytime snow builds up in an area, particularly at the intersection with School Street, that it'll be cleared to maintain those lines of sight along the corridor. Next slide. With respect to off-site mitigation, today, independent of this project, there are some movements coming off the ramps that do experience moderately long delays, particularly during the commuter peaks. If you're getting off of 128 northbound in the evening, that left-hand turn has some delays. We've committed to doing a study to prepare what's known as a traffic signal warrant analysis, where we look at crash history, traffic volumes over an extended period, and identify whether or not either of these locations meets the criteria to put a traffic light in. And in conjunction with that, we also prepare detailed conceptual improvement plans that would show what those improvements would entail if that is warranted. And then lastly, with respect to transportation demand management, we certainly want to promote the use of non-SOV vehicle trips. There is commuter rail service in town, within a 10-minute drive from the site. All tenants will get a welcome packet that alerts them of transit opportunities, pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. Every unit will have a work at home space that people that don't want to go in the office have the ability to work from home. And then there'll be bicycle parking, both internal and external, to promote the use of bicycles by the residents and guests. And that is all I have for tonight. Again, I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone has, either now or at the end. Thank you.
Greg, we just have a couple more slides. Would you go to the next slide? So we've seen this slide. This is what I had, the first slide. It shows our proposed site plan superimposed on an existing photograph that we took from a drone. Next slide. So we did this in response to a request from the Conservation Trust. And what this shows is the distance between both our proposed driveway as well as the building to not only our property line, but also to the Old School Street Trail. And what it shows is, for those of you that can't read it that closely, it is a little hard on the screen, I admit. From the corner of our building to the Old School Street Trail is about 266 feet, and it's 245 feet to the property line. And from the driveway, it's 185 feet to the property line and 194 feet to the path. So I think a picture's worth 1,000 words. There's a lot of vegetation that's going to remain untouched between the Old School Street Trail and our property. All of that vegetation, it's not 5 feet, it's not 20 feet. We're talking hundreds of feet. We're almost 200 feet from the driveway to the existing trail, which takes me to the next slide, Greg. This also is a little hard to see on screen, but it's available on the town website, or will be. But what it shows is basically the existing topography, how our building will sit, and then draw your attention to the bottom, if you will. That shows the proposed or the existing and proposed elevations. If you look to the bottom right of that image, you can see vaguely what's a path with 3 individuals standing there, and they're at about elevation 45. If you then look, give or take, if you then look to your left, you can see a car which is sitting on what we would call our driveway. And this cross section shows that our driveway is approximately 85 feet. So what that means is, not only are you about 200 feet from the path to the driveway, you're also about 40 feet below the driveway in that location, not to mention all the existing vegetation so that exists. So we did these cross-section exhibits and the aerial in response to some of the questions that were raised. And let me just say, we'll do what we can do, and I think we're, hopefully demonstrating that we're making a concerted effort, but there's nothing anywhere under a 40B or friendly 40B or otherwise that says people can't see the building. I mean, in Winchester, on the 147 unit I permitted, probably 150 residents can see the building right out of their back door or their front door. Likewise, in Newton, we just did 178 units in the middle of a neighborhood. So there's nothing that says that we have to totally conceal the building so nobody can see anything. That's not realistic, and we're not going to represent that we're going to do that. But I think, and certainly, we're open to suggestions. What we've shown is that relative to direct impacts on residential abutters, I mean, I would be interested in knowing what, under 40B impacts are measured by tangible things like you're casting shadows on somebody's backyard, or you're blocking the sun from somebody. We don't have anybody around us other than people enjoying the walking trails and trees. So we take very seriously the concerns that the trust has communicated, and I'm sure members of the public, and we'll do what we can. And these exhibits, I think, demonstrate that relative to how we're approaching siting the building and preserving existing vegetation. But it's a long process, and we'll be happy to listen to things. So with that said, Mr. Chairman, we appreciate your indulgence and patience. If you have any questions, I obviously had the benefit of seeing a lot of the chat balloons that popped up during the presentation. A lot of those, are not uncommon, and things that we would, hope to answer when we provide a consolidated written response, which is, I think, what the town is going to request. So the floor is yours.
Okay, so how I normally handle these is I go around board members and ask them to, if they have any questions regarding the presentation first, and then I move to asking for public comment. I'm going to make a couple of preliminary comments about how we're going to handle the Q&A session. So obviously, I said that we we're going to have Q&A at the end, and of course, a lot of people were commenting in the chat during the presentation, and there are some open questions in Q&A which we will come back to and answer. We will cover those questions in the Q&A that people have typed in, and I appreciate people doing that. We'll answer some of the items in the chat window tonight. We will try to go through them. I'd ask you not to, over the next several minutes or extended period of time, flood the chat window, because it's going to be difficult for me to actually catch up with all of this. And some of the comments in there we're not going to address tonight. We'll take down as a record. We'll add them to the compilation that we want to make a more measured response to, either in writing, or we'll write articles, or we'll address them in our next or successive board of selectmen meetings. And some of them where those ones where there are comments about the quality of the development, those ones I probably won't address. Where there are questions that are specifically about the technical aspects of the development, certainly we'll try and get those addressed tonight. And I would encourage people strongly, I know I've seen this in social media, and I've seen this already in the chat window. People do very swift, very broad, back of the envelope conversation or calculations that are wrong. And then they draw conclusions, and they jump to conclusions about what the impact is going to be. I would really strongly encourage people, instead of doing that, to think about what the question is that you actually have. Like, how many cars is this actually going to add? And instead of making an assumption about what the impact of that's going to be, ask. The developer will try to answer it, and then the town in turn will notice this question and try to provide a more detailed answer. But if you just formulate a conclusion and run with it, you're gonna probably be running with the wrong information, and it's not gonna help you, it's not gonna help the town, it's not gonna help anybody. So take a big deep breath. This process is gonna take a while. Trust us, we're gonna try and get you the best information we can, and work with us to answer your questions in a timely and effective manner. So with that, I'm gonna ask board members if they had any specific questions about the presentation so far. So go ahead and unmute yourselves. I'm not gonna ask you in any particular order.
Yes, Eli, I have a question. This is John Round.
Based on what I've heard in the chat, seen in the chat, there are some things that were handled very early in the presentation that probably should be underlined again. One question is, how many of the units will be for lower income restricted use, and are they permanently income restricted, and how many units do we get to count as part of our affordable housing inventory?
Should I answer that?
Sure.
that was the one question I tried to answer in real time. So anyway, 25% of the total inventory of this project will be deed restricted permanently to households earning up to 80% of area median income. And also, it's important for people to recognize that the restriction and the typical household that occupies these units are gainfully employed, members of the workforce. This is not fully subsidized housing. These are not destitute people. These are people that are commonly priced out of towns like Manchester by the Sea and others that are gainfully employed, but they're making, $40,000 a year, $45,000 a year, and looking for high quality housing, and frankly, they can't afford it in Eastern Massachusetts. It's programmatic. It's based on area median income. That's how the rents are set. It's not specific to Manchester by the Sea. Relative to how many of these units are counted, as I mentioned at the beginning, per 40B regulations, the town will be able to count all 157 units on its subsidized housing inventory. So even the market rate units will count, which is how the town will get above 10%. So hopefully that answers the question. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make just one other point, piggybacking on what you said. As part of the public hearing process before the Zoning Board of Appeals, the town has the right to hire peer review consultants to review our information. So it's not, here you go, town, take our word for it. Here's our grading and drainage plan, and the zoning board's like, oh, we don't have engineers, we can't. No, the town has the right to review traffic, to review civil engineering, to review hydrology, and to review all the technical submittals so that the town's interests are represented. So that's all part of the process. And that's where I talk about how, we can review very specific, measurable engineering principles, traffic counts, things like that. Other subjective things, like we don't think this is right for Manchester by the Sea, those under 40B don't get reviewed because they're subjective. There's no quantifiable analytical information that goes along with that. So I think it's important to know that the town will have the ability at our expense to review all the technical information from, credentialed professionals. So I know there's probably some in the audience that are dubious as to some of the information we submitted, or skeptical or cynical, but ultimately that information will be reviewed and it will be confirmed. Or if there are things that we missed, or somebody has an issue with some of our methodology, we'll work to come to a consensus on, what the peer reviewers do request. So I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you, Jeff. John Round, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Eli. A good presentation by you, Jeff, and your team. Touched on most issues, but not all of them. Got a couple of questions that I'd like to ask. One in particular, can you provide a little bit more information about your septic system, or how that's going to be handled, and what the environmental issues are associated with that? I didn't see a lot of detail there. There was some information that was presented here in your presentation,
Sure.
But can more detail be provided?
Yep, I'll comment on that, and then if David Formato from Onsite's still on, I'll turn the floor over to him. But because this area of Manchester does not have any municipal sewer, we have to do what's called an on-site wastewater treatment facility. And what that means is we're going to have to handle all of the effluent from the project, through that facility that we'll do on site, and we'll have to develop all the infrastructure and the leaching fields and the like. That process is handled exclusively through the Department of Environmental Protection. So there's a very rigorous permitting process that's separate and distinct from the 40B process. So theoretically, and I will say this won't happen because, it would be of great how would I say this, folly or error on our part. But if we effectively got an approval for this project and then we could not, get an approval from DEP for the wastewater treatment plant, we're stuck. Because we can't obviously build a project and not handle everybody flushing their toilet. So that's a separate and distinct permitting process, but we cannot start that process until we have confirmation on some of the big picture items that we have represented tonight. The layout of the building, the footprint, grading and drainage, number of bedrooms, etc. But once we're deep enough into the process with the Zoning Board of Appeals, we would move forward with that very extensive permitting process, all of which the town would be kept up to speed, would receive all the information, all the submittals and whatnot. But ultimately, the permit granting authority in that area is DEP and not the Zoning Board of Appeals. Everything else is under the purview of the ZBA. David, I don't know if you have anything, if you're still there, if you have anything to add on top of that.
I am still here. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
All right, we're like 2 for 2 on the team here, so we're trending in the right direction audio-wise. Yeah, so thank you, everyone, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for having me. And as Jeff mentioned, Dave Fumato with On-Site Engineering, and our role on the team is assessing the site and implementing permitting and design for an on-site wastewater treatment facility through Mass DEP's groundwater discharge permit program. It has nothing to do with Title V septic systems. It's an entirely separate set of regulations within the state that cover these. It's important to note that the process is very rigorous. It's an approximately a year-long process, and it's broken up into two parts. The first is assessing the site for capacity to actually dispose of treated effluent to the ground, a la a septic system in concept, but there's a lot of soil testing, soil hydrogeological properties that are evaluated and tested with the DEP to make sure that the site can actually accommodate that particular volume of wastewater. It's very specific to those areas that you're going to be using for effluent disposal. So it's a very rigorous process. Once that's been vetted and demonstrated to the state's satisfaction, you then move into permitting of a treatment system. And it's important to note that for any on-site discharge that's over 10,000 gallons per day of sewage flow, according to Title V criteria, the typical 110 gallons per day per bedroom that a lot of people are familiar with, you're required to provide treatment to drinking water standards. So you're essentially groundwater quality standards for drinking water. So you can't impair the groundwater quality that would make it not suitable for use. So those standards are set into the regulations, and it depends on where the site is on the levels of treatment that are provided. But at a minimum, it's going to be tertiary level treatment all the way through nutrient removal. So it's a very, very rigorous system, and it's very high quality by the time it's being discharged to the ground.
So so we can assume that there'll be more detail that will emerge as this moves through the zoning board process, I think.
Yes.
You get
Extensive detail.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Pages and pages.
I'll look forward to that. There are pages and pages already. One other question I have deals with transportation. And I reviewed the report, and it largely dealt with the entry-exit issues on 128, but it did not deal with the intersection associated with School and Pleasant Streets. And those of us who live in that general area know that that's a very, very busy intersection, especially during school hours. And I'm wondering if you could expand that transportation study to look at that particular area and come up with some comments on that. I also observed that much of the study that had been done was done in the summer, and I'm not sure that's necessarily typical of what goes on traffic-wise throughout the year.
I can answer that, and then I would ask Sean. Yes, I think we can expand the study to take a look at that intersection. Typically, and I heard, or I saw one of the comments in the chat of, well, the traffic study didn't include downtown Manchester by the Sea. Well, typically, by the time the traffic dissipates going in lots of different directions, it's an immaterial impact. I know, people won't believe that, but your traffic peer review consultant will confirm as much, that by the time, in terms of the difference, but to your point, relative to School and Pleasant, we can look at that. And also, I believe, and we live in a time, unfortunately, now where, traffic is not what it once was because of COVID. We factored that into our analysis as well. So that's a long-winded way of saying we can ultimately look at School and Pleasant, or some other intersections that may be of interest as we move forward and update the study. And then one other thing, I'll beat somebody to the punch. Some people involved with the master plan asked us, what our feeling would be relative to a shuttle. And I know, people unfamiliar with multifamily housing, even a project at this size, there's no way we would support just exclusively to our project a shuttle. The usage just wouldn't justify it. However, we would be willing to consider some sharing, and certainly sharing in cost or financial contributions to a greater Manchester by the Sea shuttle, that would stop at our building, among other places. And that would certainly be something that we would find to be an amenity for future residents, and something we would, be open to discussing with the town.
That's it for now for me, Eli.
Okay, Jeff, if I could piggyback on John's questions about the traffic study. I was also concerned about Pleasant and School, which is highly impacted by traffic in the time period right up until about 7:45 in the morning, when people are trying to get their students to school at the high school and middle school in particular. And since the high school and middle school right now are operating offline, and knock on wood, if COVID holds off completely blowing up this winter, they will be back online after January. That's the current plan. So any kind of add-on or addendum to your traffic study that would include the impact on that area during those hours of, say, 7 o'clock until 8:15 in the morning, and similarly in the afternoon, would be best done after the middle school, high school comes back into business.
All right, well, consider point noted. We got you, and we're on it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Becky, any comments?
Yes, please. I do have several questions. Just starting, Jeff, if I may, how were you able to, or how do you come up with 16 visitor parking spaces for a 157 unit building? And
Usually, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go.
Yeah. Usually, rule of thumb is about 5% of the total parking. And I know. I mean, let's jump into parking for a sec beyond visitor. The historic old zoning was always 2 spaces per unit. That particularly for rental housing is just, it's just, not appropriate. It's inefficient, and it's grossly overparked. The projects that we've done most recently are closer to 1.3, 1.4, because this site, for all the wonderful characteristics I've mentioned, but granted it is a vehicular site. I mean, most people, you don't have direct access to the train or the bus. So, And how we arrive at that, and this will all come out, is, not only do we own and manage lots of multifamily housing, but we have the benefit of having all the data of parking ratios. So, and also in this building, we have 80 one bedrooms, I think it's 80 off the top of my head. So it's not the traditional, people have the vision of 2 spaces per unit. That's really family housing when you have, husband, wife, couple children, relative to this proposal, we think 1.5 spaces in the parking allocation we've provided based on all listen, we would be doing ourselves a disservice if we underparked this building. It would hurt our marketing, it would have hurt our lease up. People that rent here aren't going to be, some of them probably are going to be down in Boca for part of the year or whatever. So it's not like this building has 157 people, 157 households at all times of the year. So both visitor and our total parking allotment, we feel comfortable with. But parking is always something that gets talked about, and traffic as we go through the process. So, we would expect to have some discussion on that.
Thank you. And you answered the other question I was going to ask. And I will say, thank you all very much for a really succinct presentation. And I have seen plenty of developments, and this is neither weighing in on this at all. However, I've seen so many developments where, as you said, there is huge parking outside. You just have swaths of macadam. So it's nice not to be seeing that here. Regarding the cars that are being discussed, is there any way to determine potential additional impact on town parking as well as at, as say, Singing Beach, something like that? Is there any way to estimate that?
Ooh, that's a good question. I could talk to my traffic engineers about that and see if we can come up with something. It would be modest, I would imagine, but your question is noted, and let us contemplate that one.
Thank you. Okay, and I just have a couple more questions regarding the driveway. How will you prevent cars from parking along the driveway? So especially in terms of breaking down curbs and runoff, etc. How will this be prevented?
Well, primarily from signage. It's going to be clear that it's a driveway. One of the things that we did do, and it's designed as such, is both travel lanes are wide enough that where a car to break down, another car can still get by. We're gonna have no parking signs along the driveway, but if there was a breakdown or somebody chose to violate those directives, it's not like cars are not going to be able to go up or down. That's one of the reasons we designed it also for the fire department in that regard. If a car broke down or something like that, they can stop that. So it'll be clearly marked. The distance between those no parking signs, I couldn't say at this point in time, but it will be clear as you drive up and down the driveway on both sides. Likewise, we will be directing people to, guest parking as they start to get up to the plateau. So I would say signage predominantly would be the way that we handle that. Obviously, once tenants and residents move in, they'll understand how the parking works. So it would really be more geared towards, visitors or people that haven't traveled there before.
So does this also, then in terms of sanding or salting in the winter, how do you prevent that runoff?
Well, that's a good question. And that's one of the things that we're going to have to discuss or that we're going to have to demonstrate to the satisfaction of the regulations that we handle all of that. appropriately, and we treat it all, and we catch it. I mean, I don't know if Carlton's still on the phone or on the Zoom, but he can handle about how we'll have to treat that in the winter, and how we treat the stormwater and the snow melt and the like from our driveway. Carlton, are you still there?
I am, if you can hear me.
Yep.
Yep.
So the sand and the salt, there'll be a treatment train put together for the stormwater. These are requirements of the Mass DEP that we're required to meet because we're within 100 feet of a wetland. We're in their jurisdiction. So we'll be required to remove 80% TSS removal, which is the sediments and sand that you're talking about. We'll need to put in hydrocarbon catch hoods on all the catch basins so that all the hydrocarbons will float. The water will be able to get through the hood without getting discharged downstream of the site. So all that infrastructure will be put into place with the stormwater system to catch the sediments and the salts and the hydrocarbons. And it's all standard design as required by Mass DEP.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. Kind of thought there would be guidance on that, but and then the last question just right now is regarding garbage, compost, recycling, things along those lines. I would imagine you have your own service up there. Is that how that goes?
Yeah, so it will all be privately managed. We will have it will all be handled by our management company through a third-party provider. We'll certainly work closely with the town to understand, if it has any recycling programs that it's, promulgating in town, but it'll all be privately managed. Relative to parking under the building, relative to trash, relative to a lot of the operations of this building, I mean, the future residents are going to expect they just want to pull into their spot. They don't want to be out in the elements, get out of their car, get in the elevator, go right up to the floor of their unit. Likewise with trash, they don't want to be hauling things. So there'll be trash rooms and trash chutes. And all of that will be managed and maintained by the property manager. Likewise, the stormwater treatment that Carlton just discussed will have a very detailed what's called an O&M, or operations and maintenance plan, that we're required to adhere to, that spells out not only the initial construction, but then just as important, on an ongoing basis, making sure that infrastructure is kept up to speed, making sure everything is cleaned and maintained as it should be, so everything is working. And the town has recourse against us if we're not, maintaining the system as required in that plan. So it's not like we just do it and we forget about it. We have to make sure it's, consistently and constantly maintained.
Thank you. And I actually have one last question, if I may. And I'm guessing you said that when you all were looking at the turnaround and the access for the fire truck, that the fire chief was involved with that. So was the fire chief the one that gave you a fire truck parameters to determine what was needed?
Yes.
For the building?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Eli, I have one other question.
All right. And then I want to get through to some of these chat questions in the Q&A section.
Okay. Jeff, this is a large parcel, and your development of the parcel is concentrated in one portion of it, with the leaching field going towards the other portion. But there's a significant amount of the parcel that's at this point undeveloped. Are there any
we have no intentions of developing the parcel further. Moreover, the permit that is granted would run with the land. So it's not like, oh, this is phase 1 and that's phase 2. We're just applying for this. We have no intention to do anything beyond this, if that's where you're going with the question.
The question goes in that direction, and would you be willing to entertain a clearer commitment to your intent than just you saying we have no intention to do that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, as the chairman indicated, as customary for most friendly 40Bs, and as this board well knows, commonly there's called frequently called a development agreement.
Yes.
And that kind of spells out, the town's ask, our requirements, the town's, what their responsibilities are. So if there are things that are important to the town that we can deliver upon, we would expect that through those discussions, you guys would identify that for us. So
Okay, I just wanted to open that up.
yeah, but I can tell you that the plan that we've represented tonight is that's the plan. There's no future aspersions for phase 2.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so how I'm going to deal with the next few minutes here is I'm going to go through the open Q&A questions, and I'm going to try to gather up the same sort of question that appeared and aggregate them together as much as possible. And actually, Jeff just touched on one of them, but I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on it because one of the first questions in the Q&A are there future plans for Lot 18 that appears as just a wooded area? And I think you basically just answered that. There are also questions along the lines of would you be willing to place the rest of the land under a conservation restriction? I don't want to get necessarily into commitments on those things, but if you want to make any comment on that, please feel free, Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, listen, tonight's the first public hearing, so I would say everything's on the table. So if the town has things that are important to it, or, keep a list, or when you ask us if there are follow-up questions tonight, it would be helpful to us if you start to introduce some of the things that you have on your mind that you'd like us to consider, and a conservation restriction, I would imagine, would be one of them.
Right. And once again, I'll point out for the audience that so part of the ongoing process is to come up with this list of things that's important to residents and important to the town overall. So over the coming weeks, we will be taking all your feedback along these lines and trying to coalesce them into these requests that we might make as part of the negotiation process for the development agreement. Next question in here, the question about affordable units, that's already been answered. And the question about septic's been answered. Yes, it will have its own septic. And there's a question about why the increase in affordable housing isn't covered as part of the proposed 40R. I guess, and the relationship between the 40B and the 40R. Sue Brown, do you want to take a moment and speak to that?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll be very brief because it can get very technical on both ends, but for anyone who doesn't know, the 40R is we're looking at creating a neighborhood district that may include this site, but would also include the land across the highway by the MAC where the medical center is, the town-owned sites, etc. And that district would be required, if it passed, to have 50% of its development as housing. If we include this project in that district, that would take care of a lot of the requirement for the housing for that entire district, thus freeing up the rest of the land there, or most of it, or some of it, more of it certainly, for more commercial use, which was one of the primary considerations for creating that district there. So does that, I guess in the, what I would say is that we're thinking very seriously and hard about the amount of housing and how the development in the 40R can be integrated with this as a community. And we would go from there. I'm happy to answer specific questions. I hope that sheds some light.
Okay. And the question about the other 70% of land, about whether or not it'd be developed, has already been answered. There are questions about green and sustainability features and LEED features in the construction of the building. Do you want to, could you make any comment about those, your plans for solar or anything else?
Yeah.
That
We talked about this with the trust the other day. Some of the specific architectural elements have not been fully vetted. It's not because they're not important to us, but they're a little less important early on in the process in comparison to things going on in the ground or at the ground level. But things like sustainability, you know, durability, environmentally friendly design, those are all very important to us and something that we would, you know, take very seriously. And I don't know if Manchester by the Sea has a design review committee or some, you know, a municipal group that is charged with that, but we certainly would be open to listening to what some of those things might be. But like, you know, EV stations for the vehicles, you know, we're getting, you know, much more, many more stations than we typically used to do. So all of that's important to us, but we have not fully, as you've seen, the designs are at a schematic level. You know, we haven't started to design the inside of the building, all the, you know, mechanicals and whatnot. We'll do that later, but if, you know, there are some things that are important to the town, we certainly would consider that as we advance those, our thinking in those areas.
Okay.
But for instance, solar, I mean, this is a flat roof building, you know, on a plateau. It seems to me like this building would lend itself pretty well to some solar panels up there. You know, but we haven't gotten to that level of detail, so.
All right. So there are multiple questions about how the calculations are made for impact to the school system with respect to the 30 new additions. Can you go through the formulas that you use to develop that?
I can give a high-level overview, and then I don't know if Mark Fugere is on the call. He's our fiscal impact consultant, but we have the benefit of thousands and thousands of units of mixed income multifamily housing. So it's not speculative. It's based on, you know, hard data of school-age children that have been residing in these types of developments. So in our experience, and I'll let Mark, if he's still there, comment on this, 1-bedroom units just don't generate kids, and 2-bedroom units less so, and 3-bedroom units are where the kids are generated. And what happened several years ago as part of negotiations between developers and municipalities, municipalities were saying, all right, we'll give you what you want, but eliminate all 3-bedroom units. And that was a common, like, negotiated item. And the state said, no, that's awful. It's discriminatory. You're discriminating against families. So now every 40B, whether it's 5 units or 500 units, has to have a minimum of 10% 3-bedroom units, which is what we've included here. But really the demographic of these types of developments, and I can say this, you know, we're in the process of doing 2 in Winchester right now, which is a very, you know, which is a nice community with a consistent demographic to Manchester. The predominant occupant or future resident are people that live in Manchester by the Sea now, that want to downsize. They have a single family house and they don't want to plow and landscape, and maybe their kids have moved away. They want really nice space. They want, you know, fun amenities and things that they can do, but they don't need a 2 or 3 or 4 or 6,000 square foot house anymore. So that's a big demographic. Unfortunately, half of the marriages in this country end in divorce, and a big demographic in this type of community is whoever's moving out of the house per a separation or divorce agreement. They want to stay close to their family. They want a nice place to live. And there's really nothing of this type. And then you get some young professionals, maybe they're saving up to buy a house in Manchester and they don't have the necessary equity. They're recently married or in a relationship. Maybe they have a baby, but the baby's obviously not school age. So it's Manchester by the Sea, like a lot of North Shore communities, like a lot of other communities I work in, they have the single family house thing down pretty well. They have family housing down pretty well. So if you have a family of 3, 4, 5, 6 people, there are options in Manchester. There's very few options for this type of housing. So this is not family housing, it's open occupancy. Whoever wants to ultimately live here can live here, but that's really the demographic. So it's a long-winded way of saying we arrived at a school-age children estimate of 30 children. It's in the fiscal impact analysis that we submitted, and you know, it was based on all sorts of other developments from similar communities. And the other thing I always found interesting is Manchester is not too dissimilar in that a lot of the schools are, the populations are decreasing. So at one point, even considering our 30 kids that are being added, it's still not what the school system was 3, 5, 8 years ago. So under 40B, you don't need to do a fiscal impact analysis, but we wanted to do it because these developments of this demographic type and style are fiscally positive, even considering the school-age children and the impacts on municipal services. This is estimated to generate, you know, between $100,000 and $350,000 a year to the town coffers, even considering school-age children. So that was a long-winded answer. Mark, I don't know if you're on the call, if you want to add anything to what I just said.
Good evening, this is Chairman Mark Fougier. I did the fiscal impact report. I think, you know, Jeff covered it pretty well. The school ratio I came up with was 0.383 per unit for the 2 and 3 bedroom units that are on this project. They were taken from some 2,600 units of 40B apartments. So they were taken from similar type developments. And that's where we came up the ratio of the number of kids. And, you know, I'll support what Jeff said about the variety of housing, the mix of people you're going to see in there. The 3 bedrooms is where a majority of the units children come from, and the majority of a greater percentage come from the affordable units, not surprisingly, than the market rate units. We also use metrics to measure impacts on the fire department and the police department. We're anticipating approximately 59 police calls a year, again, based on a database that we've generated in our company from 40B developments. We're projecting approximately 27 fire calls a year, which is broken down to 11 fire-related calls and 16 EMS calls per year. And again, that's based on a database of call data that we track from 40B developments that's listed in our report. I mean, if there's other questions, we'd be certainly happy to follow up or get into more detail, Mr. Chairman.
I think that's fine for me for now. I wanted to get the basic structure of the information. I will remind everybody, so as part of this process, I said at the outset that we have handed the materials for the presentation and the package and the application from the developer have been handed to the various different town boards, the planning board, the finance committee, conservation commission will be weighing in. All these boards will be, you know, at one point or another analyzing aspects of this project that are relevant to their areas. The Finance Committee would be looking at the fiscal impact and advising the Board of Selectmen as to their opinion of it. We'll also ask the schools for their model of the fiscal impact of addition of kids to the school system, so that we have our own independent picture of what we think the fiscal impact will be, knowing the very specifics of our town finances and structure. That's going to take some time, and as we go through this, we will develop our own picture, and that information will be presented back to the residents as well. So I'm going to try to gather up, so I did touch on schools a little bit there. I'm going to try and gather up a few more of these questions. There are a whole bunch of the questions in the chat related to number of units. How come the building is such a particular number of units, citing other places that were smaller number of units, discussing the height of the building. There were a few questions that said, or comments saying, reduce the units to a certain number. So what I'm going to say is this: we're not going to address those questions tonight. The part of the negotiation process will be around the size and number of units in the proposed development. What I'm going to ask people is, if you make some statement or comment like reduce the number of units to 75, can you please write to the board and say why you think the number of units should be smaller, or a particular number? Just saying that it should be a particular number is not something that we'll be able to address really or work with. We need to have some notion of why people want such a thing before we could even begin a discussion around it. So I'm going to roll back up to the top of the chat and see if we can pick off a few of the other specific questions that we've missed already. And also, if people want to raise hands and ask questions by voice, they should feel free to do that now, and we will unmute you and let you ask your questions.
Mr. Chairman, I haven't been writing down the questions in the chat. I assume someone with the town would, consolidate that or provide us.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, we're obviously not going to be able to go back and sweep with accuracy all of them.
Right.
We will do our best. We'll hit some of them tonight, and the rest we will hit in other meetings or in some summary write-ups for people. We do have somebody who wants to speak. They're listed as Nojo. I'm going to unmute you. I'm going to ask you to identify yourself. And again, please be asking specific questions about the project. Don't be advocating for or against it. And right now, that we're not in that mode tonight. And here you go. Nojo, introduce yourself.
Hi, this is Noel Johnson calling from Harvard Street in Manchester, but I'm just curious about what the town would do. In other words, looking at the architecture, and it doesn't seem to be fitting, frankly, with the town, and what committees there are to review this and to look at this structure. It really, quite frankly, seems to be quite unfitting with the rest of the town.
Can I comment on that, Mr. Chairman? Yeah, go ahead. Architecture is an interesting one because it's subjective. And I would say if the town, has some strong feelings about our facades or, you know, what the building looks like. We're definitely open to suggestions. I have not been involved with a single 40B project where the design looked identical at the end of the process as it did at the beginning. So if there's some ideas that people have, or if there was a, you know, an ad hoc committee, we're certainly open to that. Our architects are excellent, and we can incorporate, you know, hopefully incorporate some of those. You know, I will caution though, we've been involved with a couple towns where we go in one direction and then we come back and then the zoning board says, yeah, we don't like that. And we end up what we started with. So because it's subjective, you know, we would like, you know, if possible, a group that is like, you know, advocating or speaking on behalf of the town, because we don't want to, you know, just be going, and it's different than engineering where it's based on math and you have, you know, things that you have to solve for, whereas architecture, some people like one window type, other people like this, some people like shingles, some people like clapboards, you know what I'm saying? So there's lots of different subjective, but with a long-winded way of saying we're open to suggestions. We're not saying that what we've represented tonight has to be exactly as it is. You know, presumably everybody on the Zoom tonight lives in Manchester or has roots in Manchester, so we're certainly open to ideas and suggestions as we move forward architecturally.
Okay. So now, next question that was much earlier on tonight was, could we highlight where there are wetlands vis-a-vis the property? So I don't know if any of you are prepared to go back to your presentation.
Well, we can go back, or if you look at the image on the top of the this sheet that's before you, if you see that finger, you know, below the building, that's the, you know, predominant area of wetlands on the site closest to our building. There is one other isolated wetland, which is what Carlton had mentioned, where there's a gravel path going through it today. We have filed an application with the Conservation Commission. They've done a site walk and I believe are comfortable with the wetland designations. We have not completed that process. It's currently a work in progress, but that's the kind of amoeba-like shape underneath the building is the predominant wetland closest to our building.
Okay. Separate, so there was sort of a group of questions around rentals versus condos and Airbnb and then rental prices. So I'm going to gather that into a little block of questions for you. So one, how will you be determining the rental rates? Have you already come up with the rental rates for the units? Can you reiterate how you plan to manage the project in the long term with respect to rentals and what you're going to do, whether or not you sell the units, and also whether or not you do Airbnb or short-term rentals?
Sure. Yep, you've thrown a lot at me there. A couple of them very easy. One, once this is permitted, it will never be converted to home ownership. It will stay permanently rental. So you can scratch that one off the list of concerns or speculation. Two, I mean, we established some preliminary rental rates, you know, for the units, 1 bedroom, 2,500 to 2,900, 2 bedroom, 3,000 to 3,500, 3 bedroom, 3,500 to 4,000. You know, but this will not be ready for occupancy, even if everything moves smoothly, probably until, I've done this enough times, I should know, but I think 2023 or something like that. So ways off. So when we're ready to open, obviously, you know, the units will be, the market units will be marketed for, you know, what we think the market will bear. at that point in time. The 25% affordable obviously will be restricted based on what the area median income is at that point in time for the region of which Manchester by the Sea is included. And then, Mr. Chairman, was there one other question in what you asked? If there was, I forgot it.
Yeah, Airbnbs.
Oh yeah, that can be prohibited per conditions in the permit. I mean, we wouldn't allow that, per our, as owners and managers. But if it makes the town feel better, they can write that in as a condition of the permit.
Okay.
I mean, there's no subleasing, so and honestly, I'm not a big Airbnb guy. I don't really know exactly how it works, but somebody per their normal lease could not rent a 2-bedroom and then turn around and rent it on nights where they're not they're not there. They're away for a month, so they sublease it. That's grounds for termination of their lease. The town could write it in as a condition. So there's lots of different ways to have recourse on that issue.
Okay. Michael Carvalho has a question. So Mike, you are unmuted. Go ahead.
Yes, thanks, Eli. My concern has to do with the assessment of the impacts of this project as an initial matter, a critical initial matter, before any approvals or we get further on this, on the sensitive receptors that are located to the north and west, specifically the Wilderness Conservation Area, the Cedar Swamp, and Sawmill Brook.
So
the question is, when will that determination be made? When will the assessment be made? Is that something that's months away, a year away? When will that assessment be made before the town can decide whether or not this will be an unreasonable impact or not on those sensitive receptors?
So the answer is, I think we're going to have to get back to you on that. Sue Brown, do you have any input do you want to give here?
Sorry, no, I would look to Jeff to see if that is typically part of the comprehensive permit when it goes before the ZBA. I would think, I don't think the applicant is required to do that in advance.
We talked about the other day. I mean, we're going to have to demonstrate that we're not going to have any adverse impact to the tributaries or groundwater or the resource areas off our, on our property, obviously, but immediately adjacent. So, any approval from the Board of Selectmen would be conditional on us satisfying the zoning board, that we're doing just that. And our technical team is aware of those concerns, and, those are detailed studies that will be done in due course and will be submitted to the town for their review and the review of their peer review consultants.
So, Mike, I'm pretty sure that doesn't give you a precise enough answer to make you super happy. But we will, we've heard the question and the request, and we will address it as soon as we can.
Thank you, Eli. I think it's a watershed question to even move forward in this project. We spent 120 years protecting this area. We ought to stick to that mission.
There was a question related to water usage, and I've had a couple of questions related to how much water this development will use and whether or not the water table can sustain it. I suspect that the answer is yes, but we will be looking into that from the town side. We're fully capable of making a pretty good determination of whether or not it's going to be a significant impact to the water table. There was also quite a comment about the potential need for a sidewalk running into town. I don't think we'll try to address that tonight, but we've heard the question and we will certainly follow up on it. Let's see. Have shadow studies been done to evaluate how trees lower in the grade area will be affected? Jeff?
Mr. Chairman, with all due respect and all candor, I've never, ever, ever seen a shadow study done when you're not talking about a structure or residence, ever.
That's fine. It's a factual answer, and I will go with that for now.
I mean, if it was of critical importance to somebody during the zoning board process, could we do a shadow study? Yeah, I mean, we can do it. It's, you know, additional cost to me, and I'm not sure for what end, but I mean, usually you do shadow studies when you have residences around the property and you're casting shadows in somebody's house or their backyard or a school playground or something. We have nothing around us other than open space, trees, and a passive recreation path. So
all right, so now I'm going to try and see if we have any other remaining little questions on the tail here. I think that the questions, well, there was a question about what would the expected occupancy by age demographic and how did you arrive at these estimates and what towns are used by comparison?
I mean, we haven't broken it down exactly by percentage, but before I indicated, you know, who the primary demographics are, and that's based on, you know, other multifamily housing developments in communities with similar demographics. You know, my client recently completed a project in Hingham called Bear Cove. I know sometimes to people on the North Shore, the South Shore feels like miles away. But Hingham's a pretty nice community. It's a very nice project, and you know that demographic that I represented, we anticipate here is, you know, exactly the demographics that you know, rented that. I think that was 250 units, but it's open occupancy, so anybody that wants to live here can live here. But it selects itself, you know, based on people's lifestyles, where they are at that point in life and what they're looking for. And it's typically people downsizing from a single family house, or, you know, as I said, displaced, or somebody looking to rent by choice, you know, until they, you know, buy a house. Those are the predominant demographics.
Okay. Will any wetlands need to be filled in to complete the project?
Gonna wash this at some point. You know, we got to work and wash and dry.
Carlton, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you want to take that one, how we're approaching that, and the replication and what that means for those that aren't familiar with that process?
Yeah, so as part of this, we will be filing notice of intent with the Conservation Commission, whose jurisdiction is to hear matters within 100 feet of the wetlands. Currently, they have an ANRAD in front of them, and the ANRAD is just to lock in where the resources are. We were supposed to be heard on the last meeting. Because of technical difficulties, we got pushed to the other meeting, but in the interim, they have walked the site and the process has been started. As far as wetland filling, there's two different types of wetland on the site. that we've submitted to get approved. This bordering vegetated wetland, that's state regulated, and we are not filling anything within the bordering vegetated wetland. There's an isolated vegetated wetland, which is basically a depression of a certain size that doesn't meet a threshold to be state jurisdictional, to be a land underwater or a land subject to flooding. That wetland we are proposing to fill, and we're keeping under a threshold of 5,000 square feet, which would trip a larger permit. And I think it'll be somewhere around the area of 4,000 square feet. And our plan is to replicate that in kind along another bordering vegetated wetland to get basically a better, more friendly wetland at a 2-to-1 ratio. So there will be an isolated wetland being filled as part of this project.
Carlton, so just so people understand, if we fill 4,000 square feet of isolated wetland, we're then creating 8,000 square feet attached to an existing resource area, correct?
Exactly, yeah, and it'll be attached to a bordering vegetated wetland, would be state regulated. You hear me? Sorry.
Yep.
Yeah, no.
Okay. A technical question actually from our finance committee. Is this project getting funding from the DHCD? And
No,
so,
no. It's privately funded. There's no tax dollars of any kind associated, or tax credits or any other kind of public subsidy.
okay. And separate question, would the project comply with the Massachusetts Stretch Code and the New Energy Code?
Yes. Although that code is constantly changing, you know, by the time we go to pull a building permit, but I could say, you know, pretty resolutely that we'll comply with whatever that code is at that time.
Okay. Okay, so where is the Cragside Museum as shown in your second slide? I don't know if this.
Craigside was a house in Manchester. It was torn down decades ago. It's been reproduced. I think it's on the New Hampshire coast, but I'm not entirely sure. Google will certainly tell me.
Huh, interesting, okay. All right, I think that is the bulk of the questions. I know that I missed one or two in there, and I know that some people are not completely happy with the completeness of the answers that they've received on some of the other ones. So we will be capturing these questions and aggregating them and addressing the aggregated versions as much as possible in some of our future discussions, and where we can, we'll put together a sort of a FAQ that we can put on our webpage, I think, so that people will be able to refer to it. So, because a lot of these questions come up over and over again. Questions about rental, questions about fiscal impact, cars. And the more we hear them, the more we'll put emphasis on them, so that residents have an easy place to go and get the answers to the questions. So I think we're pretty close to wrapping up, although actually Steve Gang has a question, I think. I'll get you in just a second, Steve. I'm going to encourage participants and attendees here to go to the project application on the town website. We have a 40B webpage. We're going to be updating that on a regular basis with information from this project. And again, please send us email with your suggestions and comments. And We will be scheduling meetings with the developer over the next several weeks to as we move through this process. There also will be Board of Selectmen meetings where we will most likely have regular discussion around this project, and I will, as much as possible, try to answer questions from the public at those and take input from the public on those.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask one question? Because I'd like to know what my homework is, but I mean, we heard a couple things, but is it fair to say that we'll get on, you know, like i.e. look at the intersection of School and Pleasant and a couple other things? Fair to say though that I should sit tight until I hear from you or Sue or Greg with a consolidated list of follow-up items?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And Steve Gang, I'm going to unmute you and let you talk now.
Great. Thank you, Eli. This is Steve Gang. For those of you who don't know me, I'm currently the chair of the Conservation Commission. And I just need to correct one thing that Mr. Engler said a bit ago. It is true that the Conservation Commission has walked the site to look at the flagging of the wetland resources, but we haven't made any determination about it. So saying that we're comfortable with it is a stretch. We're going to hear the application next Tuesday night in public meeting, and I welcome anybody who wants to attend that. Thanks.
Okay.
I apologize if it was not my intent to misrepresent. You know, clearly it's not been formally accepted. I mean, my conclusion was anecdotal, but I apologize for that.
Mike Carvalho, I think I may have not lowered your hand. Did you have anything else that you wanted to say? I'm going to unmute you for a minute.
I think we'll have lots to say. I would just say that we did meet with, we had a Zoom meeting with the applicant yesterday. There was no agreement, and I don't, to the extent that there was any suggestion that MECT somehow was agreed or was a positive thing or anything like that, that would be also a stretch. We want to listen to the applicant, we want to understand, but at this point, MECT does not understand a lot of these very important threshold questions.
Acknowledged. I don't think I represented that we had the trust's consent or agreement. I just said we had a productive conversation, but I acknowledge there are unanswered questions. So I don't have anything to add to that.
Okay, so this is really the beginning of the process. It'll take a while for us to work through this. I know that aspects of it have been ongoing for a while because the developer has been working on their presentation. But realistically, this is the point where the town and the various different boards are really going to begin the process of engaging with the developer. It'll be a busy time over the next several weeks as we go through these negotiations and these discussions. I know everybody's going to have to absorb a lot of material. I'm just going to say I hope everybody will bear with the town as we work through this. We're going to do our best to provide everybody an opportunity to give their input, and we're going to do our best to provide the support to the various different boards to develop the information they need to best advise us and come to a conclusion about this project and how it can be made to work with the town and what the town should be asking for. So there's one or two remaining comments that some were answered. Yes, you can send mails to Sue Brown. She'd be a great person to take the suggestions and coalesce them for everybody. So there's a comment in here about weeks seems very short. Is there a schedule you can look at? And the answer is no, there isn't. I wish there was. I'm not going to commit to a hard schedule like January 21st, we're done. I know that the developer wants to move along in as timely a manner as possible. There's a lot of material here. There are a lot of moving parts. What I can promise you is that we're going to move very regularly over the next several weeks. And over that time period, it'll become more clear how long this process is going to take, whether or not we're going to rapidly be able to get to a conclusion, whether or not it's going to take a little bit more time. So bear with us. You can watch the Board of Selectmen agendas. They will carry some detail about what we're discussing on this. There'll be articles in the Cricket, and there will be information on the town's website to update people on a pretty regular basis. And one last time, really encourage you, if you have questions or concerns, ask the folks in the town office, Sue Brown, Greg Vetterspiel, members of the board, rather than making assumptions and running with those assumptions. It won't help us come to useful conclusions if people are operating off of bad assumptions. So with that, any other questions or comments from board members, from the developer, any closing remarks? I think we're getting pretty much to the point where I'd like to wrap this up.
Eli, may I add something?
Yeah.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I just wanted to let folks know that if they're wondering about the need for affordable housing, they can also check out the Affordable Housing Trust meetings. I think they're going to be looking at this project over at their next meeting, and also on their webpage at the housing production plan, which just kind of it outlays the needs for affordable housing in the community. So that's it.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have anything to add. I just appreciate the time and the interest of the board and the members of the public, and we'll stand by waiting to continue the discussion, wait for the town's questions, and look forward to submitting additional information and whenever the next meeting or public hearing is. But we sincerely appreciate everybody's time and interest.
All right, well, thank you very much for the time you spent building this presentation and presenting it to us. I'll thank you in advance for the time you're going to spend in the future with us. With that, I guess I will take a motion to
move to adjourn.
Second.
All right, so I had a motion to adjourn from Ann Harrison and a second from Becky Jakes. Roll call vote, Mr. Round.
Yes.
Mr. Bodmer Turner.
Yes.
Ms. Harrison.
Yes.
Ms. Jakes.
Oh, yes.
Mr. Bowling votes yes. Mr. Engler and the rest of the crew from SLV, appreciate your time tonight. And thank you to all the residents who attended, and we will see you in future meetings.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eli.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eli. Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you all.
Good night.